What do you think about it? We're going in. We're not even doing an intro. We're soft open.
No intro?
No intro.
Soft open like this.
Soft open. What do you think about it? I think it's like, you probably get this all the time, though people listening don't know because you are a pastor and have been. But I'm sure you've been asked that question before.
I think I get asked that question more like in this context. I mean, but I have been asked
like
that
podcast question.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, like you're on a panel, you know, or things like that. But yeah, I've been asked that question plenty, and I have very like my biblical answer, like that I think is biblical, and I could be wrong.
What is it? Let's hear it.
It's that we live in a fallen world that has been marred by sin or wrongdoing or not doing what God wants, doing what we want, right? So we've got, depending on how you want to define it, but we're people who are flawed, and because there's flaw on our planet, things are going to break and things are going to be cracked and things are going to be, so bad things happen. A car accident happens because we're flawed. We make mistakes. We turn left when we shouldn't. We fail to the right away. Someone might die. Or our life is such heartbreak for us that we have to go to the pub after work and drink 6 pints and then drive home and hit someone and then they die. Why did that person was a good person? And then also, what is good? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
What does goodness mean? Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, and I'm not trying to be a philosophizer over here, but bad could be bad in the moment, could be good long term. You just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it also is a state of mind, how you look at things.
Yeah, those are the two most interesting things. Like when I think about this question, I did when I was working at the Gathering, we did this thing called Flights in Faith, and we were like, and I did it at Church of the Shepherd when I worked there, and I've done a similar version when I was at the Well, still there, until they fire me. But
sounds like that you're telling the world you're resigning.
I'm just not resigning. This just in. But we built around like, what are questions people are already asking, right?
Sure.
And people are like normal people in the bar. What are the things that they're asking and all that kind of stuff. But that one was one that was really interesting to me. And I remember doing it. It was like a panel type discussion. And that's where I went, which was like for our community, which is a pretty like non-evangelical progressive community. I got way more pushback than I thought I was going to. But I was like, when I hear that question, I think I have to at least define for myself, what does it mean to be good? Like a good person, like what does that mean? And what does something mean to be bad? And I love like the idea of like long term and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, this week you and I have been talking about this off air, like we're both experiencing like loss in some ways, right? My wife's aunt just passed away, and so like as this is being recorded, like the funeral's coming up on Friday, so tomorrow, and it's just so interesting because she was very young. I don't want to tell her whole story here, but like young-ish, not expected, and the question that's asked is like, well, why would God do this bad thing to this good person? And I think it's a really interesting, I don't know how interesting it is as a spiritual or religious exercise, but as a philosophical exercise, it's really interesting to ponder. And I still don't really have that good of an answer other than, is anyone good but God, or anyone good but the Father, right? As Jesus would say. But I don't know, it's an interesting thing to ponder. And I bet you said like you talk about it in this context a lot. Like I suspect, though I could be wrong. So like let us know in the comments if you're watching or listening, either on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you're listening. But like I think it's a question folks that are deconstructing are probably asking.
Well, I mean, I think the question comes up when something bad happens in our life. Like you're experiencing loss. I'm experiencing loss. My cousin, who was my youngest cousin, just passed away, and I'm getting ready to go home for the funeral. And, you know, I don't ask myself that question in the middle of my son's soccer tournament or I ask it when something happens. You go to that place in your mind, or people come to, you know, you as a pastor and me as a previous pastor, being able to say like, well, why did this happen? Like, why would God a lot of times people say, why did God make this happen?
Yeah. Or let this happen.
Even. Well, my stance is that he doesn't make things happen. He's not, I don't think God's up there like we're G.I. Joes and he's just moving us around and guiding. I think we have free will. And then I believe that God allows things to happen. And then people will say, well, why didn't God intervene? And, we don't know all the miracles that God does do in our lives. We don't know how many accidents we almost were in, or how many times we almost ate some food that was, I don't know, make us sick, or I don't know, anything, right? Does he do that at all?
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in miracles, but does he do that at all? I mean, we know if you look at Jesus did that. He raised some people from the dead. Look, she's not dead. She's just sleeping.
Yeah.
Get the girl some food, like there were these miracles and there's these things that he did where it seems like if you look at Jesus' life, he intervenes. Like he can make that decision. And then, then the question is, well, like if somebody dies and we didn't pray for them, like Danny, when you leave here, if I don't pray for Danny that he doesn't get in a car wreck on the way home, maybe he will. And then does God need that to unlock?
Yeah. Like, if something bad happened to me, is it your fault as a friend or a follower?
Or is it just like, my question is, does God need that to unlock his blessings on our life? I don't think so. Right. Like he's God, he can do whatever he wants.
Sure.
So at the end of the day, for me, if God chooses, because my faith is my faith. Like if God chooses to allow bad things to happen in my life, which obviously has, there's been 2 fairly big blows in the last 2 weeks in my life. But I have to say, like, do I still trust him? Do I say, well, God's got a plan maybe, or his plan is perfect, whatever that plan is. And however much it involves me, which is for me, it's everything, right? It's my whole life. But for him, I'm just a little pebble in a beach, right? And so how much, like, and then what is part of his plan for my cousin and for the other stuff that's been going on? I really can't say. And I have to just say that I trust him. That's where faith comes into play, that I have to trust. Now, I've seen some horrific things in other people's lives where it would test my ability to have strong faith. I loved my cousin. And I still love my cousin. Yeah. Very much. But he had an addiction, and that addiction took him. And that addiction, I think it wasn't his fault. Like he was just, I think maybe at the beginning it was his fault. He made some decisions. Sure. But once you become an addict, like you're
an addict, right?
Yeah. You're just, your body just says, I have to have these chemicals. And if you don't put them in here, you're going to be sick. And so it's just like being hungry. Yeah. They go after this.
Especially when you're that deep, it's like having like addiction in the family, like your experience is firsthand more than most. It's like, it's not as easy as a snap of the fingers, right?
Yeah. No, it's not. And he'd been to rehab and he'd been arrested and all those things. And I don't want to share too much, but at the end of the day, he was on a downward spiral. It's that. And I think that maybe you come to terms with certain things in your mind. And that's different than if somebody just got in a car wreck and it was someone else's fault, right?
Yeah.
I don't think my cousin was a bad person. I know his heart.
Yeah.
He did some bad things, and then a bad thing happened. But we don't ask, why does it bad things happen to bad people?
Yeah, we never asked that.
Right. And I don't think he's bad. I think, I don't know if he was good. I know he had a very wonderful heart in the way he loved other people, and treated other people and treated me. And, so, it's sad that he's gone. It might actually be a benefit. I don't know. I mean, his eternal salvation, I don't know, we could argue about, can you lose it? Can you not lose it? But I believe he's in heaven, and I believe that I don't think a good thing happened to a good person. I think a painful thing happened to a person.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I know, we had talked we were going to talk about this topic, but I didn't say, hey, I'm going to ask you to dive deep into a obviously super fresh and painful topic. And so I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think about cause there is a lot of nuance in it, and there's a million different directions. As you're talking, it's just spurring different things in my mind, and even thinking about my own issues and pains and things that I've gone through. And I feel like I've had a pretty privileged and comfortable life in a lot of ways. And I remember the first time I had experienced any real level of pain, it was the first time I was I actually understand where people are now. Right. And I understand what that is like to some more degree than I thought. But I think it's interesting, like what you said about like it's happening to a good person or a bad person. And I think what's interesting for me is like I think that's us. We're asking that question, right? Like I don't think God is asking it in the same way. And I think God looks at each and every one of us the way God designed us, which is like entirely and completely good. And even though you said like that image maybe has been marred, or not maybe has been marred, and like we don't look like the fulfillment of that creation and the glorification, as Emily has talked about in the podcast before, of like our glorified selves. I don't think like that changes the way that God views us. Like I don't view my kids any different because they can be little shits sometimes, right? Like I don't look at them like, man, you're not good anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way God views us. And so that has been for me in some ways like a shift. And it's like, I think God holds the pain with us and sees us as good. And so it's like we see, well, is that a bad person or a good person? Did they deserve it, not deserve it? I think God sees pain across the board as like, that's a person that I love and that is good. That's like completely and wholly good to me. And just like Jesus weeping with the death of Lazarus and like feeling pain, I think God probably feels it with us. But that's the hardest thing is like, we don't necessarily feel the feels that God has because it can feel really isolating. And I know like with the death of my wife's aunt and all of this, like death is just so isolating and pain in general is really isolating. And destruction is everything is isolating that doesn't feel really wonderful and good. Right. And I think that's what makes it the hardest and the easiest to ponder that question is like, where is God in the isolation, which could be another episode on its own, another conversation. But I think when we ask that question, it's really because it's like, I feel no goodness in this. It's making me feel less good. And I thought I was good. And like, how do I wrestle with all that? And just, I think it stirs up. It's like all of these things thrown into a blender. And then it just like the mess of it's all together. And even now it's like, how do you even parse it out and talk about it? Because it's so convoluted and messy and intertwined.
Yeah. And there's different levels of that. Like you probably had a relationship on some level, you know, with her. She probably wasn't your closest friend.
My relationship's different than she had with her sisters or daughters or grandchildren or mother, any of those
people,
right?
but watching your wife go through the pain, then also that's like this whole other layer of the onion where you're like, you wish you could take it away. You wish you could make it so that they didn't have to feel that. And so obviously watching someone that you love be in pain is a level of pain. And then on top of it, your own loss in that relationship. So, you know, it's nuanced and layered and there's stuff going on. But again, why has God allow this stuff to happen? You know, if you had lived your whole life and you were in God had a calling on your life to be a pastor and you lived your whole life very comfortable and never had any pain, it would be really hard to be empathetic when people came to you and you had to preach a funeral and you had to do things. You had to go to hospital visits and you had to sit across from somebody who's expressing their pain. Yeah. Oh, you know, it'd be inauthentic.
I'm a far better pastor than I am now at 34 after experiencing loss of loved ones and divorce and broken relationship, like all the things I've experienced again that I like, and this isn't trying to be self-deprecating. I still think I've had a very generally comfortable life.
Sure.
But I think I'm a much better pastor now to that exact, like my empathy. I'm not a naturally empathetic guy. You know this.
I'm not either.
Anyone that knows me is like, Danny's like not crushing it on empathy all the time. But I would say like it's helped me immensely in understanding, I think, more fully the grace of God, which I don't think I appreciated it as much because I know I always needed it, but I didn't feel like I needed it, right? Like I was crushing it. Like who needs grace or God's love when they feel the comfort of everything? Now, which is not me saying that I think God does things so that we appreciate it more. But I will say on the other side of it, personally, my story not being anyone else's, I appreciate the love and the grace and the comfort of God more than I ever did until I knew that I could rely on it or needed to rely on it.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to white knuckle life, right? And I think that's, you talk about like, not you talk about, but we talk about this idea of like, why do bad things happen? And like the fact that God can use any of these awful moments for ripple effects of really good things. And like, that's total main character energy to put myself at the center of everyone else's story. And Emily and I have talked about this on this before. Like, and I don't think that's super good all the ways, but I would say like, I've been able to personally experience like an ability to open my hands and stop white knuckling things more through having to navigate the painful moments of life and understanding like why do bad things happen to me when I feel like I'm good, and why do bad things happen to the people that I know to be good. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and what's the inverse of that question? Like, I mean, let's play it out. Let's say that only good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people.
Yeah.
First of all, who's to say who is what?
Yeah.
Because you might hate your neighbor. Like your neighbor might be like throwing their grass trimmings over the hedge. Oh, there's a limb down. They throw it over in your yard. Dead mouse. Boom. You know, you like, I want to get Marge next door. but Marge has thousands of people that love her. You know, or hundreds of people that love her.
And know her to be a good person, right?
Yeah. So who gets to decide? That's one thing. But then also like if only good things happen to good people, bad people would start to try to pretend to be good people, but it wouldn't take. It would be like The Good Place. Like it'd be some sort of weird inverse underworld. And
there'd be no. And again, I think I can already hear Emily in my ear being like, I hate that you're saying this. But I do think if it was like there was predetermined, you're good, you're bad, these good people get good things, there's no mechanism to move out of either one of those. And there's no reason. I think life's existence is so much less interesting and meaningful if it's like you're just in your lane and you're going down the path and it's all good for you because you're good. Who decided that and how did I end there?
Well, it's not like a Marvel DC superhero thing where you're the Penguin, you're bad. Yeah. You're the Riddler, you're bad. You're Batman, you're good. Life is gray.
Yeah. You know? I think it's why we all like it, like going to movies and stuff. I think it's why shows with like the anti-hero, like Breaking Bad is a great example. I didn't watch a ton of it, but I think it's an interesting show because like people wanted to like Walter White.
Sorry, I heard something weird.
I did too. I don't know what that was, but I thought it was a phone maybe. I don't know.
Is it a watch?
It's not me. I think something's happening out there.
Weird.
But people like the anti-hero, right? Like they like that kind of thing because we feel more like that person. Like they're a little bit, they inherently want to be good. They might do bad things because that's who we are. Like we're kind of those people in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Like we are not Superman.
Right.
We are also not the Joker.
Right.
We're more like Deadpool.
Well, you do bad things and good things, and I do bad things and good things.
Yeah.
So when you're in the midst of doing something quote unquote bad, whatever that is, you've said a number of bad words on this podcast over time, right? But who decided that those were bad words? And when you're saying those bad words, does that mean you're sinning?
I just watched a TikTok about someone saying Christians shouldn't say those things on podcasts, which is really
swear words, curse words.
Yeah. And that made me think. Actually, it gave me an interesting like personal introspection. I was like, should I stop swearing? And I was like, but I'm like, if again, this is not even our topic, but I'm like, I feel like it would be disingenuous to who I am. To like, the only reason I swear is not for like clout or to be cool. It's like I just like I swear in my life, and I don't drop F-bombs almost ever, but I like say shit from time to time. And
and also it's just a sound our voice box makes.
Yeah.
We tell our kids that there's adult words and kids words, and when you're an adult, you can decide to talk how you want to talk.
Yeah.
And the Bible also says, "Don't cause your brother to stumble." You know, I think it's probably far more likely that if you're constantly inviting your coworkers out for drinks, that if someone has a problem with alcoholism, they're going to stumble than if you swear sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you caused them to start cursing. I don't think God's worried about that stuff.
I don't think so.
I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe I don't understand what's going on, but I don't think so.
I think you and I are two dumbos half the time anyway, trying to figure it out.
No, I'm a dumbo all the time.
So as I'm working on this funeral right now, like one of the movements of the order of service is like this movement that we call like a word of grace, right? Like in the midst of tragedy and painfulness and all that comes with that, like what is the word of grace found in that? And so I think an interesting like bow for that, there's going to be no clear-cut answer in this conversation. I think it's just you and I chatting on it.
Well, let's ask them too. Write it in. What do you think? Why do you think God allows or makes or whatever it is that however you would say it? What do you think? I
think that would be wonderful. And like I actually think on this one, I put a poll, in the Spotify, at least, where you can put those things in. So like definitely respond to that. But what would be your word of grace in this? Like, and again, like you and I aren't giving the textbook clean cut answer, like one size fits all, but like, and you've said a lot of things in this, but like, what would be your word of grace for someone who's trying to navigate that question? They're on like, why did this bad thing happen to me who's good, or to a family member? Or just someone in the dark night of the soul, right? Someone in the thick of it.
I think to encourage people that are out there that, you know, if you need to find a scapegoat, I think God's okay with you blaming him. If that helps you move forward. I think he's a big God, and he's powerful, and he loves you. And I think that he, you know, if you ever watch a movie, which I'm sure we all have, and there's that part where like someone's really sad or upset about something and they're hitting the other person on the chest, like, why,
Yeah.
you know, that's the vision I get of it, you know, like the view of it that I have is like, God is just going to let you pound on him, and he's going to just say, I love you, and hold you, you know, when you're done and you start weeping. So if you have to blame God, you can. I think that's misplaced blame, but he has big shoulders. And so I don't know if I'm doing the right thing that you're asking me to do, but then I would say, and then when you get the time, when you're able to breathe again and come down from that pain, take another look and just ask yourself, like, do you really think that was God that said, oh, your life's great, I'm just going to pluck this person out of your life, or I'm just going to hurt you in this way because I'm God and I just like throwing little arrows at my children. I don't think that's very real. I don't think you'll come to that conclusion.
It's kind. I think I'm with you on that. I think oftentimes we put God as the kid with the magnifying glass burning ants, like, which is, I mean, if that's who God is and how you perceive God, then like it makes sense to like feel mad. I guess mine would be, like I said earlier, like this idea that I think all of these situations, death, addiction, pain, loss, all of it, like all the dark stuff, it feels isolating. And this is just at the forefront of mine because I'm writing it for this service of remembrance. But I was like digging around, and I was in John's gospel, and in there the disciples are just like wrestling with what are they going to do when Jesus leaves. And they're like not crushing it at life at this point, and they're like not crushing it on what they'll do when he leaves. And he says to them, like, don't be troubled. Like, I'm going to be with you, and you're going to be with me even when I leave. And I think I read that and I'm like, he doesn't say don't be mad, doesn't say don't be frustrated, doesn't say don't experience the pain of loss and any of that and in the reality of life. But he's like, you don't need to be troubled. Like, be hurt and feel the pain, experience that. But I think there's a nuance, and some of it's like English linguistics that I'm doing here, but like there's anger and frustration and sadness, and all of those are real things that we go through. But like, I think we don't need to be as troubled in our hearts and our souls, because it's like, I do think there's a bigger picture. And Jesus goes on to say, like, I prepared for you and I've made a way for you. And it's like, I don't believe in predestination, that God's like ordering every single one of my steps. I believe in free will, but I also think that doesn't mean that God hasn't seen everything that's going to happen and that God has prepared a way for us. And when I think of that perspective thing you mentioned earlier, I think that's where the grace is for me. It's like, pain is so, I remember when I tore my ACL, like that was the only thing that was real to me at that moment. I didn't have kids anymore. I didn't have a wife. I wasn't a pastor. My knee pain was all I experienced. It was real. It was my life in those minutes until I was able to come out of that. And I think that's what you have to experience. But it's like, now, years later, I see such a different recollection of that experience in the moments that flowed later. And I think God has such a different perspective, which is not comforting in the moment, right? The pain hurts. But I think there's a promise to trust in that, like, God is prepared and is preparing a way. So that'd be my word for that. So
yeah. It's good.
So I want to downshift us, and I want to end with, which will be, it's going to be a hard shift.
Put on the air brakes.
But we don't have any notes or emails this week, so there's no email corner. But I did want to do some recommendations, because it's been fun. Like, I actually get a lot of messages about that, of people like, thanks, like, I've never checked this out. And so, and it's like, none of it really has to do with this topic, so right. I think that's interesting.
Sure. Well, mine will. A little bit.
Well, mine, I'll go first on this. I just watched a documentary on Netflix called Poisoned.
Okay.
And it's about the food system in America.
Oh yeah.
And it was disturbing. That was troubling. Of like, and I don't know if you remember, you were actually probably living in Seattle at the same time. You remember that Jack in the Box outbreak in '96?
Oh yeah.
Of E. coli? Yeah. So I was 7 living in Portland, and I remember just like
48.
You were not 48,
oh.
but I do remember being like, I like remember hating Jack in the Box, and like I was taught like it's disgusting and gross, and I never really remembered why, but I also in the back of my mind knew there was this E. coli thing happening, but I never connected the stories. So I just flooded all of this awareness of that time to me. But it was really interesting just looking at like our food system and how much more it could improve and all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff can be a little bit like defeating and alarmist as you watch it. But for me, it was like a really, really interesting look at America and food, and even looking at shows some other places in the world that had fought similar problems and have essentially eradicated them. And it's like their countries to similar scopes that we are. And it's like, it's not out of our ability to realign, but as all things are, it's driven by financial interest in politics.
Right. So. Well, Jack in the Box is funny. It's funny because it's stoner food.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and they don't come out and say it, but they're open until 3 a.m.
Right.
And then they have these late night boxes that you can get that are super cheap because that's when you have the munchies.
Right.
I
think one is called a munchie box. I think it's what it's called. Yeah.
Well, that's so interesting though, because if you think about like, there are like corporate dudes in suits. Like what we see from a marketing standpoint is the dude with the big white head, the ball head. But that's not what those dudes. I mean, those dudes are like, it's a multi-$100 million company or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they're like, all right, how do we sell more to pot? Okay, and I bet you they're having meetings like, well, marijuana is legal for use in Missouri now. Let's roll out some more restaurants, or put out some more ads.
That's interesting.
I mean,
I hadn't thought about that, but
why
it is definitely stoner food, or it's like, it's drunk food. It's like late night. I need to put something to soak up whatever in my body. Food.
Yeah. Isn't that weird though?
It is weird.
And like I mean, like we have restaurants here called High Point, and like and that's a burger place that is clearly about being a stoner. Like it's in the marketing. It's called High Point.
Yeah.
But Jack in the Box is doing essentially the same thing, but they are doing it sort of cheeky, like tongue in cheek a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
I was so pleased when High Point came to St. Charles County. It's like the one in Cottleville is great.
I have not been to it yet.
There's 2 by me, one in Kirkwood, and the original is like in the city, and I have loved them. And when I'm out here, I'm like, hey, do you want to like getting lunch time for the church? Have you thought about going here?
Yeah. I forgot they even, it's open in Cottleville.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. I haven't been. All right. My recommendation is a podcast that's been put out by New York Times and Serial. Do you remember Serial?
Yeah. Never listened to it, but it was popular.
Very popular. Huge. It's called The Retrievals. And I'm only in the first episode, so I don't know that much about it, but it's so far it's really good. It's because it's about a nurse who was stealing fentanyl from, so like it was at Yale, and this nurse, her job was to like be a nurse at Yale at the hospital, and for women who were getting their eggs harvested for like pregnancy later.
Okay.
I don't totally understand how all that stuff works, but apparently it's a very invasive process, and she was putting saline in them instead of fentanyl that's supposed to kill the pain. With fentanyl, apparently you feel no pain at all.
Okay.
And these people were freaking out because needles and...
She was doing it on purpose?
Yeah, she was a drug addict and she was stealing the drugs.
Oh, man.
And so, anyway.
What's it called? So say everyone listening.
The Retrievals. The Retrievals. Yeah. It's a weird name. But it's a blue cover with a woman looking back away from the camera in a hospital gown.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested. That's the kind of stuff. Like, I'm not a huge true crime person, and my wife is super into it. Like podcasts like My Favorite Murder and all those things. Like, she's really, really into.
I went to that live when they came.
You did?
I did.
So did my wife.
No.
Did you go to the one at
She
Steeple?
sat on my lap.
What?
Nothing. Never mind.
Well, she listens to the podcast. So.
I don't need more. I did for a long time, but yeah. Where was it?
Steeple.
Yeah.
That's funny. You guys would have been at the same one. That's really funny. I didn't know you guys were into it.
I think my wife went too.
Yeah. So you're like a big
Nah,
Fan of it.
I was a fan of that show because I really liked all the other shows I've ever heard. They're kind of like they're too into it. Like they're like they want to be detectives or whatever.
Yeah.
The two women on My Favorite Murder like are comedians and
Yeah.
they're kind of
Funny.
They're funny, but they're also making light of it, which is probably not great, but
Yeah.
I did find it interesting. And they blew up. I mean, they by accident blew up. And so it was definitely not part of a plan, I don't think. But so, yeah, I listened to it for a long time. I don't anymore, but I went, my friend got tickets. And so we all went.
Yeah. I'll say my wife is like a phone on speakerphone, walk around, listen to her podcast person. And,
you mean she's obnoxious?
with the podcast a little bit, but so like I'm listening to him in the background and one of them was not, so like usually she'll listen to a different one if like she's run out or whatever. And so I was listening to one and it was annoying, not because of the sound, but like, you guys think you're detectives and you're not.
Yeah.
And I just have no tolerance is the wrong word, but interest in listening to that. I'm like,
right.
I don't need to hear someone who has the same education as me speculating, acting like they know something that they really don't.
Now, I will say that there are web sleuths, like they do solve crimes for real. It's if there are some stuff out there that you can watch or listen to, that's pretty incredible. Like there are these groups of people in these chat rooms and stuff where like they'll see the same photos that a detective has, and then they'll go like. They'll know how to use technology in a different way, and they'll figure out, oh, that's a window at a Motel 6 in Cincinnati, because here and they don't
have the same boundaries that maybe the law does, right?
Yeah, and so I will say when something has been solved, or when a person has been found alive, and it's and it was because of those people, those I do like to listen to. Because then I'm like, oh, maybe I could do, and I don't have time or patience or. Focus.
Did you watch the Netflix "Don't F with Kittens" or whatever? Yeah. So that was that story, right? Yeah. Like that's.
And I did solely because of the name.
Yeah, 100. I never heard of it. I
did not know what it was about, and I was like, I'll F with a kitten. So let me watch this thing.
That's funny. Well, I'm snorting, which means it's time to wrap this podcast up. So,
all right. Well,
yeah, man. Let's embrace the.
Let me ask you a question. Do you like embracing things?
I do.
Do you like journeys?
I like them both.
So why don't we
embrace the journey? I like that.
Sorry.
That's good.
You're all ready to go.
I didn't know. Like I was like, how do I downshift this?